What if I told you that one of the greatest boxing legends of all time, George Foreman, spent his final moments haunted by deep regrets? You won't believe what his wife, Mary Joan Martelli, has just revealed. She finally broke her silence, sharing his last words and the remorse he carried in his heart until the very end. From the brutal battles inside the ring to the silent wars within his soul, George Foreman's life was filled with victories, losses, and shocking confessions. But here is the craziest part. Despite everything he achieved, despite the fame, the fortune, and the glory, he still couldn't escape the mistakes of his past. What was it that tormented him so much? What did he regret the most? Stay with me because this story is about to take a turn that no one saw coming. George Foreman, the name alone commanded respect. He was a powerhouse, a two-time world heavyweight champion, an Olympic gold medalist, and a man whose fists could drop even the toughest opponents. His boxing style was pure destruction. He didn't just beat his opponents, he crushed them, sent them flying across the ring, and left them broken. He was an unstoppable force, feared by many, admired by all. But what made this story different? Behind the fame, behind the powerful punches, there was a man who carried a burden that no title could erase. And in the end, that burden became heavier than any championship belt he ever wore. Born in Marshall, Texas in 1949, Foreman's early life was far from easy. He grew up in Houston's tough Fifth Ward, a place where survival was a daily fight. Poverty, crime, and violence surrounded him, shaping the young boy into someone who learned to fight before he even stepped into a boxing ring. He wasn't always the gentle, smiling man people later saw on TV. No, the young George Foreman was full of rage. He got into street fights, ran with the wrong crowd, and found himself on a dangerous path. But then, destiny took an unexpected turn. Through a government program called the Job Corps, Foreman found himself under the guidance of Doc Broadus, a former boxer who saw potential in him. Boxing became his escape, his salvation. It was the one thing that gave him purpose, and he dedicated himself to it with everything he had. Within a few years, he went from being a troubled kid to standing on the Olympic podium in 1968 holding a gold medal. But this was just the beginning. Foreman turned professional, and soon the world witnessed his terrifying power. He was knocking out opponent after opponent, climbing the ranks at an unbelievable speed. Then, in 1973, came the fight that made him a legend, his brutal showdown with Joe Frazier. Frazier was undefeated, a champion who had taken down Muhammad Ali himself. But against Foreman, he didn't stand a chance. You won't believe what happened next. In just 2 rounds, Foreman destroyed him. He knocked Frazier down 6 times before the referee had no choice but to stop the fight. It was one of the most devastating performances in boxing history. Foreman had become the new heavyweight champion, and at that moment, he felt invincible. He was on top of the world with nothing to fear and no one who could stop him, or so he thought. But here is where it gets interesting. No matter how powerful a man is, no matter how high he climbs, the fall always comes when he least expects it. And for George Foreman, that fall would be sudden, brutal, and life-changing. Because the next fight he had wasn't just a match, it was the beginning of the regrets that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Then came the fight that changed everything, the Rumble in the Jungle. It was 1974, and Foreman was at the peak of his career, undefeated, unstoppable. His opponent? Muhammad Ali, the man who had been stripped of his title years earlier and was now on a mission to reclaim his throne. Foreman walked into that ring in Zaire with the confidence of a man who had never truly been tested. He was younger, stronger, and had been knocking out fighters left and right. Everyone believed Ali stood no chance. But what happened next became one of the biggest shocks in boxing history. Ali didn't come to trade punches. He came with a plan. From the very first round, he did something no one expected. Instead of moving and dancing like he usually did, Ali leaned against the ropes and let Foreman swing at him. Punch after punch, Foreman unleashed his power, expecting Ali to crumble like all the others before him. But Ali absorbed the shots, whispered insults in Foreman's ear, and kept pushing him deeper into the trap. The crowd roared, chanting, "Ali Bomay!" which meant, "Ali, kill him!" And with every passing second, Foreman's energy drained. He was punching a man who refused to fall, and for the first time in his life, he felt powerless. By the 8th round, it happened. Ali saw his opening, dodged a tired swing, and countered with a lightning-fast combination. Foreman staggered. Another punch. Another. Then the final blow, a crisp right hand that sent the champion crashing to the canvas. The referee counted, and before Foreman could rise, the fight was over. He had been defeated. His aura of invincibility was shattered, and deep inside something else broke. That night, Foreman lost more than just his title. He lost the belief that he was unbeatable. And what followed was a downward spiral that no one could have predicted. He was no longer the feared monster of the ring. People started doubting him. The media turned on him. And worst of all, he started doubting himself. He became reckless, desperate to prove that he was still the same unstoppable force. But the more he fought, the more he realized that something had changed. The fear he once saw in his opponent's eyes was gone. In 1977, after a grueling match against Jimmy Young, something happened that Foreman himself would later describe as the most terrifying moment of his life. He collapsed in his locker room, drenched in sweat, struggling to breathe. He claimed he had a near-death experience, that he felt his soul leaving his body. And in that moment, he saw everything, his past, his regrets, his mistakes. He begged for another chance, promised that if he survived, he would change his life forever. And when he woke up, he wasn't the same man anymore. That was the moment George Foreman walked away from boxing. He left behind the fame, the money, the violence, and turned to something no one ever expected: religion. He became a preacher, dedicating his life to faith, spreading messages of hope and redemption. But here's the twist. No matter how much he tried to change, no matter how much good he did, the past never really let go. Because there was still something haunting him, something he never spoke about publicly. And as the years passed, that regret only grew stronger. Because no matter how much he changed, there were wounds that even time couldn't heal. What was it that he carried with him until his last breath? What was the truth behind his final words? Stay with me, because this story is about to take an even darker turn. Years passed, and George Foreman tried to live a peaceful life away from the ring. He became a preacher, opening a church in Houston, dedicating himself to helping others, spreading love and faith. People saw him as a changed man, someone who had left the violence of boxing behind. But deep inside, a storm was brewing. Because no matter how much he preached, no matter how many people he helped, he couldn't escape the ghost of his past. The world moved on, but Foreman never truly did. The loss to Ali still haunted him. It wasn't just about losing a fight, it was about losing himself. That night in Zaire, something had been taken from him. The fear he once struck in his opponents had disappeared. His invincibility was shattered, and even though he tried to convince himself that boxing was behind him, deep inside, a part of him still craved redemption. But redemption wouldn't come easily. For 10 years, Foreman stayed away from the ring. He watched as younger fighters took the spotlight. Mike Tyson became the new heavyweight monster. Evander Holyfield dominated. And in every interview, Foreman smiled, pretending he had no regrets. But behind closed doors, he knew the truth. He wasn't done. He couldn't be done. Because no matter how much he preached, no matter how much he told himself that he was a different man, he knew there was only one way to silence the demons of his past. He had to fight again. So, in 1987, at the age of 38, an age when most fighters were retired and forgotten, George Foreman made the most shocking announcement in boxing history. He was coming back. The world laughed at him. The media called it a joke. The same people who once feared him now mocked him. They said he was too old, too slow, too out of shape. But Foreman didn't care. He had something to prove, not to the world, but to himself. His comeback wasn't easy. The younger fighters were faster, stronger. He wasn't the same terrifying force he once was, but he had something they didn't: experience. And with every fight, he reminded people why his name still mattered. The same media that once laughed at him now started to believe. Could he really do it? Could a man who had been counted out actually come back and reclaim the throne? The answer to that question would come in 1994, a fight that no one thought he would win, a fight that would change his legacy forever. But what happened in that ring wasn't just about boxing. It was about something much deeper, something that had been building inside him for decades. And when the final punch landed, the world finally saw the truth about George Foreman. The night of November 5th, 1994 arrived. George Foreman, now 45 years old, stepped into the ring to face Michael Moorer, the undefeated heavyweight champion. Moorer was young, fast, and confident. He had everything on his side: youth, agility, and the belief that Foreman was nothing more than an old man chasing a dream that had already passed. The crowd didn't believe in Foreman. The commentators doubted him. Even his own supporters were nervous. How could a man in his mid-40s stand a chance against a champion in his prime? The fight began, and it quickly became clear that Foreman was struggling. Moorer controlled the match, landing sharp jabs, moving smoothly around the ring, making Foreman look slow and outdated. Round after round, Moorer dominated. The punches added up. The younger man was breaking down the aging warrior. Foreman's face was swollen, his movements sluggish. He wasn't the same wrecking machine from the 70s. The world watched, expecting him to collapse at any moment. But deep inside, Foreman wasn't thinking about losing. He wasn't thinking about pain. He was thinking about one thing: redemption. He had waited 20 years for this moment. He had endured mockery, doubts, and countless reminders of his loss to Ali. He had come too far to walk away now. As the fight entered the 10th round, something changed. Moorer was still winning, but he had gotten comfortable. He underestimated the old man standing in front of him. And that's when Foreman saw his chance. A moment of weakness, a brief opening. And in that instant, George Foreman unleashed a punch that would change boxing history forever. A right hand, clean, powerful, and precise, landed flush on Moorer's chin. The younger champion's body stiffened, his legs gave out, and he collapsed to the canvas. The crowd erupted. The commentators lost their minds. The referee counted. And as Moorer lay motionless on the mat, the impossible became reality. At 45 years old, George Foreman had done the unthinkable. He had reclaimed the heavyweight championship of the world. He wasn't just the oldest champion in history. He was proof that no dream is too far, no redemption is too late. The man who had once walked away in shame now stood as the ultimate symbol of perseverance. But what happened after the fight was just as shocking. Because while Foreman had conquered the boxing world again, what came next would turn him into something even bigger than a champion. After the fight, the world couldn't stop talking about George Foreman. He had just made history, but what came next was something no one expected. Instead of basking in his victory, Foreman shocked everyone. He announced that he would donate a large portion of his earnings to charity. People were used to seeing boxers enjoy their wealth, but Foreman was different. He wanted to give back. He had experienced poverty firsthand and knew what it felt like to struggle. His victory wasn't just about proving something to himself, it was about inspiring others. As the media rushed to interview him, Foreman remained humble. He didn't talk about his power, his comeback, or how he shocked the world. Instead, he spoke about faith, second chances, and believing in yourself no matter what. He became more than just a boxing legend. He became a symbol of hope. But while Foreman was making headlines for his generosity, something unexpected was brewing behind the scenes. The fight had made him famous again, but not just as a boxer. Companies saw something in him, a charm, a likability, a way of connecting with people. And that's when an opportunity came knocking, that would change his life forever. A small company approached him with an idea, an endorsement deal for a kitchen appliance. At first, Foreman wasn't interested. He had never thought about selling products or becoming a businessman, but when he learned more, he saw potential. This wasn't just any appliance. It was a grill, something that could help people cook healthier meals. And Foreman, who had struggled with weight in the past, understood the importance of that. He agreed to put his name on it, not realizing that this simple decision would make him richer than boxing ever did. The George Foreman grill hit the market, and within months, it became a massive success. People loved it. It was easy to use, it reduced fat in food, and it had the name of a heavyweight champion attached to it. Sales skyrocketed. What started as a small deal quickly turned into a multi-million-dollar empire. And here's the crazy part. Foreman made more money from the grill than he ever did in his entire boxing career. The man who had once struggled to make ends meet, who had been laughed at for trying to fight in his 40s, had now built one of the most successful brands in history. But this was just the beginning of his new life, because while the grill was making him a fortune, Foreman had one more surprise left for the world.